let's talk about
And
9/11, because 9/11 is a kind of epiphany for you. Explain what happened, why, and that was really the genesis, I think, of this book.
yeah, it was. I mean, when you very kindly and generously introduced me, I don't. I just wanted to dispute one element of your
Oh,
interpretation of my
I'm
journey,
gonna
as it were.
I'm gonna change the introduction. So tell me what I should change.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
well, yeah. I mean, what I curiously enough, I don't think that I was representing. You're right that I did write for quite a number of, well, almost every kind of well-known conservative publication in Britain. But I think that at that stage they were truly conservative. I mean, in the
Hmm.
sense that they represented an old-fashioned type of conservatism, which has no kind of I don't think there's an equivalent in the United States. It's Burkean conservatism, named after the sort of great polemicist and philosopher who created the idea of conservatism in the 18th century, supported the American Revolution, but called time when the French, he foresaw the terror in the French Revolution. It's based on a form of skepticism, a sort of a suspicion of grand ideas, this sort of conservatism. It's a bit, what's the right word? Patriarchal? No, it's not. Paternalistic is a better word. I think it is a bit like
Well,
that. But
Burke was a monarchist. We should be clear.
he was he was
He
he
was a
was also
defender of the monarchy. Let me put it that way.
well when the French Revolution came along, he felt that the monarchy, as I agree with him, I still agree with him, is a source of stability, or anyway, the form, the constitutional monarchy, which had evolved by the 18th century in Britain, was a stable form of government. I think, and he valued and understood stability because he feared war, and I think that's so. I might call myself a Burkean conservative, and that is the form of conservatism which survives in Britain right up to the late 20th century, from the time when Burke was writing his great masterpieces. But what the central thesis of this book is that British conservatism gets captured by something called neoconservatism, which is not, despite its name, is not conservative at all. It's an American. It's imported from the United States, and it has its origins on the left, and it is about great schemes, such unwise projects, of which one of them was the invasion of Iraq. It doesn't believe in the rule of law. It really sees the whole world as some sort of carnal house where you need to win. You have power. Might is right. I think it's a very dark analysis of how the world is, and it crossed the Atlantic before 2001, and it persuaded Tony Blair to join George W. Bush in the invasion of Iraq, and that has defined the century ever since.
You worked. I just have to ask you because it's in the book. You worked for Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
And what was your read of Johnson at the time? He was the editor where The Spectator
Yeah,
was
he
that?
hired me. He hired me in fact, in about 2001 at The Spectator. And he was a very, very good editor of The Spectator. He wasn't there all that much, but he was very open to ideas, great fun. He was a very quick, one of the quickest minds of anyone I'd ever dealt with. He saw the story. If you're a journalist, to see a story, he saw the story at once. Quicker, really, he'd seen everything when I explained an idea to him before I'd reached the end of the first sentence. It was remarkable, which caused me rather to misjudge him a bit later, because he didn't progress from that situation. At that point, he was a liberal sort of a liberal metropolitan figure, cosmopolitan, I should say.
Let's talk about the difference between how traditional conservatives viewed Muslims and how neoconservatives view Muslims. Is there a difference?
Very much so. So if you look at Burke devoted, as you will recollect, about 10 years of his life to standing up for human rights in India. He didn't agree with the British exploitation of India and abuses. The traditional conservatism of what is quite benign. It isn't really racist. I don't think it's about it's a little bit of management here. You try and deal with people collectively and enable them to flourish, but it isn't hostile, and it's very knowledgeable. It's a great tradition of British scholarship about Islam in the 19th and 20th centuries and before, as there is about other religions. And you get a tradition, the idea of the gentleman diplomat, the gentleman scholar who tries to keep the world from falling apart, and keep the British Empire, of course, from falling apart. That I think is the traditional conservatism. There's a great figure called Pickthall in the 19th century who converted, as a number of British figures did, to Islam. And then
Richard Burton.
Richard Burton is another one. And actually they're the ancestors of Philby, who founded the Saudi, was very instrumental in founding modern Saudi Arabia, who is the wonderful lady who taught herself Arabic and went and sort of effectively ruled Iraq in the 19th.
Gertrude Bell.
Yeah.
Now, so let's talk about talk about not only the difference but how that switch was made.
The switch, it is still going on. It was, and it is one of the. There needs to be a very big book about it at some point. Because I lived through this, and it took me a while to understand. I think that a lot of it was done through think tanks. You've got, there was a think tank in this country called Policy Exchange, which did a lot of the heavy lifting, the cultivation of MPs and journalists. You found it easier suddenly to get those sort of ideas, supporting the Iraq War, into the newspapers than pieces opposing it. The central idea of neoconservatism was that the world is divided between civilized and barbaric peoples. We, the Americans, and the British as the clan state, you've got to keep civilization going. It was very incredibly ignorant, if you read the pieces, about the richness of the Islamic intellectual tradition. They wouldn't acknowledge it. It was very contemptuous of foreign countries and foreign peoples and foreign lives. I think we should say there was no value attached really to the lives of people who opposed themselves. We stopped talking around this time. I think there's somebody you and I both know, Alistair Crook. You know Alistair? Probably talk to him on this. I mean, he was thrown out of. It's reported. He's never told me this, but it's been written that he was thrown out of the British Secret Intelligence Service for talking to Hamas on the orders of Tony Blair. Now, in my old-fashioned way of seeing the world, one of the jobs of an intelligence agent would be to speak to Hamas, to terrorists or to resistance groups. That's that, and yet there seemed to be a closure at some point about 20 years ago. And if you want to understand what's going on today, You have to understand this very dangerous transformation in the process of thinking and dealing with abroad, which suddenly happened. The neoconservatives seem to have felt that the world should be like New York City. And with the values of New York City, the carelessness of New York City, and the greed of New York City, and the fun of it too. I'm not going to be completely negative about New York City, but they felt threatened if they went to Istanbul or to East Jerusalem or to Hebron or Damascus, and it produces this awful language from George W. Bush, a disgusting figure in my view, who has done, who, and his axis of evil and bumping blindly into a war, invading blindly a country he doesn't understand.
Would it be fair to characterize the old form of conservatism as paternalistic and the neoconservatives as provincialism?
I think they are intellectually provincial, if you start to look into the deep origins of it, I think it comes out, some of it out of despair at Weimar. That a sense that the liberal institutions just were incapable of standing up to the nightmare. The Nazi nightmare, and really you had to abandon the commitment to representative democracy, due process, rule of law, and you had to fight. You had to use it was kill or be killed, and I think that is part of the sense that the neoconservatives brought to the world it starts, doesn't it, in the sort of late 90s, the late 20th century, and then it becomes the ruling. It captures George W. Bush when he becomes president in 2000.
Yes, although it does capture Bush, but in essence, there's no deviation from that ideology through Barack Obama, through Biden, through
right.
Stammer, through anyone else.
Still that. Yeah. It's absolutely still in control. And one of the fascinating things, actually, in Britain, and I suspect it's true too in the United States, that if you look at the people who gave us the Iraq War, which is still the greatest crime of the 21st century, there's a lot of competition now. They are still rewarded. They occupy high positions of state. Whereas the opponents of the Iraq War, Jeremy Corbyn is the most notable in many ways now in Britain, are forgotten and destroyed. And that's and Corbyn, remember, was right again and again. The Stop the War movement. He was right about Afghanistan. He was right about, everybody agrees about this, Afghanistan. He was right about Iraq. He voted, one of the very few people who voted against the disastrous Libya intervention, and one of the very, very few parliamentarians who will stand up and talk about the atrocities now taking place, the horror in Gaza. He's one of the very few. That tradition has almost been wiped out. And so if you want to protest against Gaza now, you're right out there on the edges of public opinion. The Stop the War marches. You're risking your career now if you're an academic or a politician or a journalist.